Hi, everybody. As we get started, we're just going to wait a couple of minutes, but feel free to get settled in. We have about 200 people joining us today, and so we're just going to let everybody have a moment or two to enter the space. Hi, Mira. Thank you for your question that you threw up in the chat. So today, it's really going to be a lot more about the individual conversations and experiences of our guest. So if those are identities that they have and they would like to share with the audience, that will be part of the question and answer period. But that's really up for disclosure for them at this point in time. But it's a great question and certainly something that we're aware of and that we're working on providing information and resources for. And if you didn't see that question, it was a question about whether or not today's webinar will talk about those who have intersecting marginalized identities, such as people of color who also identify as having a disability. So again, we're just waiting a minute, about 1 minute more before we officially get started. At that time, I'll introduce our CEO of Anchor to welcome everybody to today's session. Thank you for your patience, and we're hoping for a great session today. All right, so without further ado, welcome. I'm going to turn things over first to get started today to Anchor's CEO, Barbara Merrill.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're so glad that you could join us for today's webinar titled Getting Real About Racism in the Workplace, a conversation about racial fatigue and Black and Brown burnout. Research demonstrates that Black and Brown employees in every industry receive messages that make them feel undervalued, disrespected, and very much like an outsider within the organization's culture. These feelings arise not only from blatantly racist comments and behaviors, but also from daily microaggressions that are often invisible to white colleagues and coworkers, to blatant racist behaviors and slurs. However, most Black and Brown employees remain silent, fearing being labeled overly sensitive, not being believed, or even losing their jobs. This courageous conversation and open dialogue with three well-respected Black and Brown leaders, Nicole Dama, the Communications Director for NADSP, the National Alliance of Direct Support Professionals, and a member of the faculty for the National Leadership Consortium on Developmental Disabilities, Josh Rael, the Executive Director of the Alliance in Colorado, and Andre Floyd, Anchor's Communications Manager, will provide honest insight into the trauma-inducing experiences the people of color experience in the workplace and the toll it takes on their health and well-being. This discussion will also offer recommendations on how to create authentic leadership through a knowledgeable, do no harm attitude. So before we get started, I'll turn things back over to Sasha for a few housekeeping items. But just before I do, thank you, Josh, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Andre.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sasha. I'm the Director of Education and Intersectional Collaboration here at Anchor. I use she, her pronouns, and today I'm wearing a black shirt with white dots, so you can identify me on the screen. Please note that this presentation is being recorded, and this recording, along with any slides or other materials that were provided by our speakers, will be made available to you via the Anchor Connected community this coming Wednesday. Second, I'd like to draw your attention to the captioning option made available in Zoom. If you look to the bottom right of your screen, you will see the More option with 3 dots above. Click on More, and you will find the option to turn on the captioning. Please note that this is not a certified human captioner, but an artificial intelligence program, so there may be some odd or nonsensical errors. Third, we want to start this conversation out right, and that means laying some ground rules. An important way to acknowledge the emotional labor that a lot of marginalized voices feel within a community is by conducting our own research. Today, we encourage you to enter your questions in the chat or send them directly to my colleague, Allie Strong-Martin. However, we ask you to actively think about your questions before hitting send. A good rule of thumb is, if you can Google it, don't ask it. Finally, remember that being comfortable is not the same thing as being safe. Discomfort is a good teacher. If you're uncomfortable in the conversation today, sit in that discomfort, reflect on what the root causes of your discomfort, and then think about how the new knowledge you've been provided can be translated into empathy and appropriate actionable steps. So, with those notices out of the way, I'm excited to welcome you to today's speakers. And since the only credentials that our speakers need today is their lived experiences, I'd like to turn it over to themselves to introduce you to their vast array of perspectives. Nicole, would you mind starting us off today and introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure, Sasha. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be with my fellow panelists, Josh and Andre. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because my very first year working at NEDSP at an event, I had 2 Black women come up to me and ask me for a picture. And I'll never forget it because they were like, "We don't see people like us doing what you do." And it sits with me in everything I do. And recognizing the people who are in this field doing this work, and I'm here to lift them up. I'm here to be with them. And I'm excited to just share my experiences. And I will say that sometimes it's really hard to kind of speak from your own experiences when you haven't always shared them. So I just wanted to share that bit of authenticity of like, I'm a little nervous, but it's okay. I really appreciate everyone for being here and for Anchor for creating such a safe space to chat about this. So thank you.
Andre?
Yes, thank you, Nicole, and likewise, I'm a little nervous as well. If y'all have, I've been with Anchor for, the math always gets me when I try to do it. I believe it's 6 years, about to be 6 years maybe. But yeah, so I'm normally behind the scenes, not really in a front-facing capacity. So, but I am very thankful and glad that we're having this opportunity and this discussion. I think it is very important, and I think all 3 of us on the panel have different perspectives, but also perspectives that I think can shape a fuller picture for maybe some people who are attending. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. Share in your nervousness, Nicole, but we're gonna get through it. We'll be all right.
Josh?
Good morning, everyone. I also am nervous. I feel like it's easier to prepare for a policy webinar or talk about Medicaid, but Josh Rael, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm wearing a white shirt with a black, white, and gray knit tie if you're looking for me on the screen. I decided to make my intro a little bit more detailed and getting a little bit more real. So since it kind of, I'll be talking about it in later in this webinar, but I'm a 5th generation Southern Colorado native. In fact, my family lived in Colorado, New Mexico area before it was even the United States. So we often joke that the border moved on us. My family has raised me to refer to my heritage as American, not Mexican or Chicano or Latino. I often found myself using the term Hispanic in school, and I always was confused with all the different terms and what I should actually call myself. I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado. My father and grandfather are still workers. My maternal grandfather was a school teacher and a hero to many migrant school children in Southern Colorado. And besides my grandfather, I was the first to attend college, which was not an easy experience for me. I didn't have the resources afforded to me that other students had. I ended up taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans and for living expenses in school, and struggling to keep up with my studies while working full time, and racking up probably $20,000 in credit card debt. Eventually having all of the degrees and everything paid off, but will be still paying debt for years. My grandparents are bilingual. My parents are bilingual. In fact, my grandfather speaks mostly Spanish, but I refer to myself as the lost generation after growing up with, my parents grew up with a lot of discrimination and being shamed for speaking Spanish. And so they chose to not teach my sister and I Spanish. And so, although we know all the slang words, bad words, and rancheras, we don't know Spanish. As you heard, I'm the executive director of Alliance. I also have the honor to serve on the Anchor board and to chair the State Association Forum and co-chair the Alliance or the Anchor Government Relations Committee. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Anchor, thanking them for hosting this important conversation, and to everyone that's joined us to learn how to create a safe workspace that will allow you to attract and retain those loyal and dedicated workforce.
Thanks, Josh. So for decades, we know that workplace trauma has been associated with people in professions like the military and firefighting and police and first responders. Yet we know that a lot of recent research shows that workplace trauma is really widespread. And the data also reveals that BIPOC employees, so individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, experience workplace trauma at a much higher level than those who are white presenting. In particular, BIPOC women are disproportionately impacted. Nicole, would you be willing to speak a bit about workplace trauma for Black and Brown employees and maybe offer an example or two of how to both prevent and correct trauma that happens or occurs in the workplace?
Surely, Sasha, thank you. So when we're talking about this presentation and me putting together notes or slides or whatnot, I was just like, okay, I'm not a trauma expert. How do I talk about this? What do I say? I want to make sure I'm educating, but also this and that. And I appreciate our team of this panel for just being like, you're only responsible to talk about your own experience. And I will say that an aspect of white supremacy culture is worship of the written word. And the fact that I felt that I needed to bring up so much data, so much research, I was just like, here it is. I just need to start with the basics. So I'll share in that one of the things I thought about when thinking of this is the quiet quitting and people setting boundaries in their workspace. People are setting boundaries because they may be experiencing a trauma. They may have had, they may have put themselves out there for something or shared something, and maybe it didn't work out. Maybe something was said, or maybe they shared an experience they had and they weren't believed. And I just have to say, like, one of the things I will double down on is believe us. When we experience something, you might not necessarily understand, you might not know, but believe us. And having to have proof for something, it erodes trust. And it makes people feel unsafe at times. And, you know, people may just shut down. People may not be showing up as their full selves. Things may just be different. And I'll say how you can prevent that in the workplace is transparent processes. Everybody understands what happens when things are reported. There's appropriate channels for reporting things, and having authenticity be an aspect of your workplace. You want people to show up as their whole selves. I mean, obviously, we know that, well, I'll say authenticity brings out the most in your employees. You want someone to show up as their whole self to work, to put all in, to give their best, and also to be happy. You want folks to be willing to be able to get through their days and whatnot. And also preventing trauma in the workplace. I'll say this one quote that I heard on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and it's, "Your organizational culture is only as good as the worst behavior it tolerates." Sit with that a minute. Your organizational culture is only as good as the worst behavior it tolerates. And we're not just talking necessarily like racism, any way that people are marginalized in the workforce. Just really think about that and think about preventing trauma in the workplace. You have these initiatives, you have these beliefs as your organization, but is everybody who's connected to your organization have those beliefs? Your consultants that you work with, your business partners, your board members, because the people that you work with, the people that your employees work with, are having to interact with all of these people, and you want them to have the same beliefs as you, the same, and to understand the initiatives that you're putting forth, because you're wanting to necessarily support your employees, your funders, your donors, the perception from the community, the people who are receiving services from you, the people who are providing supports, being transparent in that whole aspect and way. And another thing I think about in preventing trauma in the workplace is rewiring your biases and taking a look at them. I know it's really hard. I know that some folks, it can be really hard to be like, well, I have these thoughts, how do I work on it? I feel this guilt or whatnot. If you continue to work on your biases, and I'm holding this record because I want you to think of the biases in your life as a record. Every one of your experiences, your traumas, every interaction you ever had is written onto this record. And whether you want it to or not, it plays in your every interaction, in work, in the grocery store, at the club, like in line for a movie, in the workplace. So as you're making sure to take a look at your biases and work on them, it really can rewire the way you interact, making sure that you are welcoming everyone in the room. You're not just saying, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're saying, welcome, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody. And I will say, for correcting trauma in the workplace, having crucial conversations, and I'll say that having crucial conversation is making it safe to have a conversation, because someone may have experience something in the workplace and you might be like, why maybe they didn't bring it up to me, why they are talking about it this way, or why is something happening a different way? It might be because they don't necessarily feel safe. Are you approaching them? Are you asking them to come to your office? Is that a safe space for them? Are you over Zoom and there's other people around? Just recognizing the power, privileges, and biases of every of your interactions, and taking a deeper kind of look of how you're interacting with people. Because I'll say, in my own, before this webinar, I even shared, I said I have some trauma. I don't know if I'm necessarily ready to talk about, but giving people space to take care of themselves in a way that works for them and that is safe. Thank you, Sasha. I hope that answered your question.
You threw out so many brilliant ideas of like what people can do, and I think that that's exactly what we were looking for. And to build upon what you were talking about that record, right? Like records of your life, those records are a little outdated, right? In the sense that they're classics, but we got to move forward. Like we're not even in CD land anymore. Like we are in a whole new digital space to rewrite time and how we deal with things, and journeying that way, I think is really important. I'm sure Andre will say it later, but we got to catch up. And so that's what we're working on. And to that end, Josh, we know that in the late 1990s, like Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School was a professor who really started to talk about this space of psychological this from even Maslow to present day, our lived experiences. As a Mexican American, can you speak to what psychological safety means to you and how you use your lived experiences to try and create psychological safety amongst the employees who work for you?
Of course, thanks, Sasha. So for me, psychological safety, or how we can start to address this, is that agencies really need to find ways to eliminate that fear and allow people to bring their full selves. You'll hear a lot of us saying full selves to work because that's what we all want to do and we all want to contribute. Workers need a safe space where we're not punished or humiliated if we bring forward new ideas, ask questions, express concerns, or make mistakes. If your employee doesn't feel safe or valued in that space, then they're going to bring the bare minimum to get a paycheck or they'll leave. And we've seen high turnover. And I think a lot of it is probably related to just not having that safe space. For me, I learned about psychological safety in law school because there was none. The law school's known to use the Socratic method to break down the person, to constantly call on them, make them feel targeted, unprepared, uncomfortable. I was accepted to the University of Law School, but because of my undergrad GPA and low test scores, I was enrolled and only allowed to enroll in the evening division for non-traditional students. And I probably got in because I was Latino, which I'm grateful for, but I struggled with trying to fit in. I always worked full-time during college. I wasn't able to dedicate time for studies. I didn't know how to really live outside of Pueblo, and my lived experience, cultural differences were really tough to try to figure out how to relate to some of my colleagues in law school, as well as learning I have a learning disability that I was struggling with. So that trauma really made me realize that when people are put into situations like that, they could just give up. It's the easier solution, really. I was able to make some good friends and along the way have fun. And I think that's what made me get through that traumatic experience. But then right after, I couldn't find a job after getting my JD and really couldn't find a way to cover my bills. I lived months, almost half a year or longer on credit cards, and finally found a really good job, but then soon felt trapped in that as well because I wasn't able to use or be my true self. I had very powerful and influential bosses, and I just really couldn't feel like I could speak up or challenge them at all. And if I couldn't find a better job, or would maybe get retaliated against if I left. And so I just lived with that trauma for many years. But now, I'm the executive director of Alliance, and I'm able to be in charge. What I strive to do is to create an environment where really everyone, staff and our members and our board, can approach me with questions, concerns, criticisms, ideas. And I've used a lot of those ideas and criticisms to better our agency and myself. I have developed a lot of decision-making processes, feedback loops, been able to host and make sure that people have multiple opportunities to reach out in a setting that they feel safe and comfortable. I chose to forego annual staff evaluations and decided to instead praise and really bring the uncomfortable improvement strategies immediately rather than a formal kind of yearly approach. When I look at us as a team, not a boss staff hierarchy, it is important to also, though, stand up for your staff and make sure that when they need you, to offer positive leadership, to shelter them from some of the difficult decisions facing your agency so that they can focus on their job. But for me, the most important part, or one of the biggest parts of my leadership style, is to make sure that you have fun. My past board president called it, he said I had good mullet management, which business in the front and party in the back. I do have a small team, but we've had 0% turnover in 8 years, and our members have more than doubled, with only a few agencies not wanting to renew membership. And really a lot of that is because of the feedback loops, because of the fun, because of the trust and transparency that we've been able to build as a team.
Thank you, Josh. So if you don't, Josh and I have worked on several committees together and spent a lot of time having DEIA conversations. So I think it's really fine for us to be honest and say, Josh, you and I are the two light-skinned panelists on today's panel. And we've been doing a lot to try to educate our community towards being more diverse, inclusive, equitable, and accessible. And in a recent conversation with me, you divulged that, being somebody who His family has been here for 5 generations and was here before the United States was the United States. That sometimes in modern conversations, you feel invisible, as if your lived experiences are not seen as valid by those around you. I know this is a really difficult question. I know that you're still reflecting and searching for your own answers, but can you talk about how colorism and DEIA work has really impacted you and what you wish others would understand about specifically being brown in the workplace?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, last week I was still struggling and uncomfortable with what I was going to present on. I was talking with a friend. We were on a road trip together, and I told her how I was going to talk about racism in the workplace, but my experiences didn't really feel like racism, but maybe it was. And then she immediately said, "Oh, you're going to talk about your code switching." And I'd not really heard that term before, nor did I realize that it's something that I do, but apparently I do it a lot and well. So I'm still trying to figure out what that means for me. Does that mean I'm racist? Does that mean yeah, I don't know. So I'm working through this as we speak. But you know what I've come to understand, code switching is the act of changing our behaviors, including speech, dress, mannerisms, to conform to a different culture norm. I just learned as I'm doing research for this webinar that most of the people that code switch are trying to achieve some level of power, respect, or an advantage to assimilate into a dominant culture or to appear less threatening to avoid violence. I've done all three of those things. And not knowing Spanish often causes me to feel like I'm not part of the beautiful culture that I grew up with, and that I have two cultures or two identities, and I try to embrace them both. And so I kept thinking of one of my favorite movies, Selena, and one of the quotes from that movie is, we have to be more Mexican than the Mexicans and more American than the Americans, both at the same time, and it's exhausting. And it really is. I've been told my whole life to exclusively speak English in order to assimilate and to get better paying jobs, and only to be judged by my Latino friends and my culture and community for not knowing the language. Sometimes I feel more discriminated against with Latinos than I do with my white friends. I've been called whitewashed or a coconut, brown on the outside and white on the inside. So a lot of trauma, a lot of struggle that I'm still trying to deal with. And I've been able to do this code switching at a very young age. I was always told to act white, straight, dress like I have money. So I did. And just last week, I realized as I got called out on it, the code switching that I do. I was traveling Colorado, meeting with legislators and candidates for the Colorado General Assembly. And I noticed that when I met with the white, conservative, rural legislators, I was talking about my evangelical background, my playing ice hockey or tennis or attending law school. When I was talking with my Latino, liberal, urban legislators, I brought up my family's Mexican restaurant in Pueblo that I worked in, meeting Selena as a child, or my ties to the LGBTQ plus community. And I even pronounce my name differently when I meet with different groups. I say Rael, Rael, or Rael. So the lesson that I would try to hopefully pass on to you all is that I hope that people can understand that commenting on skin tone or language, culture differences is not appropriate in the workplace. It does create that hostile environment that makes us not feel comfortable. Be respectful, don't make assumptions, and telling someone, "Oh, you're Latino, well, you're so white," or, "Oh, you're Latino, why don't you speak Spanish?" really is just adding to that trauma.
Thank you, Josh, for sharing. I really appreciate that. Code switching is definitely something that all marginalized individuals and communities have had to learn in the system, and something that we should certainly be working on understanding as a community that is working to support our colleagues. And speaking of supporting our colleagues, Andre, when I arrived at Anchor, you and I had a very frank conversation about how I could be the best ally possible in the workspace. During that discussion, we talked about when white allies should sit back and when to be vocal. Could you share with our participants some of what we discussed, and perhaps specifically about feeling burned out and how Black and Brown burnout is a different experience than what has been traditionally considered burnout?
Yeah, definitely. And appreciate that. And I appreciated that conversation very much. I think Sasha and I like knew each other's names for like, a few hours, and then we started having this conversation. I was like, this is great. So the way that I kind of approach things, especially when I break them down, is I kind of want to there's a lot of context and there's a lot. So I'm going to I might meander a bit, but I will get there in the end. I promise everyone. This is kind of my thing. That's what I do. So kind of and I think it's great to have this right after Josh. Everybody listened to what Josh had to say. Moving through the world, multiple identities and trying to fit in. And of course, the one that I'm kind of going to focus on is when you're on the outside of the dominant culture, Black or brown, and because this is where burnout happens. So moving in this world, knowing that you're on the outside of the dominant culture, know that if you do too much to stray too far from the expectations of what that culture has of you, you can bring about potential anger, dismissal, discrimination, things like that, a number of things that can happen. But then there's also the other side of it where you can be tokenized, right? You can have something where the expectations of that culture are what defines you instead of you defining yourself, or you're allowing your culture to define yourself, or you being able to not express your full culture and your full person. We've talked about being your full selves. It's the same scenario where sometimes you might not be able to feel like not sometimes, most of the time, you feel like in the dominant culture, you cannot do this for a number of reasons, or you're allowed to fit the edges of what has been set, the parameters have been set for you by the dominant culture. The end result of this is that other cultures and ethnicities aren't respected or viewed as equal. So they're either shunned as lower, branded with stereotypes, what I meant by being defined as, through tokenism, or they become viewed as almost a toy, like a fun thing. This is where you hear stories and not stories. I want to reframe that, because I have many people, from friends, relatives, family members, people that I've known, people that I don't know, people that I've just worked with for a little while, that are women of color, who have many stories of people touching their hair without them asking. That's the sort of thing when I talk about a culture as a toy. It's interesting, and you don't really respect a person as far as a person's personhood, and just go for it yourself in terms of just like touching it or commenting on it or something like that. And this is, Sasha will know, I have this thing where I think in this space, a lot of people talk about these things as happening subconsciously or unconsciously, or maybe not without intention, but I also want to make sure that we do not. And as I think there's a lot of focus on that, and I don't think that's wrong, but I do think the focus on that does stop people from being able to understand that sometimes this stuff happens consciously. Sometimes this stuff is intentional. Sometimes it is harmful. We understand the world and the society in which we live. It is not a safe one. And the reason why it is not safe is because it has been intentionally set up to not be safe. And so as much as when people do their own internal reflections, you may want to be like, well, subconsciously, I wouldn't know that, but understand that, one, I would challenge that and ask you to really think about it. But then two, understand that that's not everybody. Some are consciously doing these things. I told you, I kind of go all over the place, so I'm getting there. For most non-white people, these things are known and felt through just navigating in society, like Josh was talking about. You're existing, Josh and Nicole, you're existing, you're going through, what the dominant culture is, and if you step out of line, you're welcoming something, some sort of judgment, some sort of risk of something. It could even be violence or in anything. You're risking something. So most of us are learn these things as we navigate, or we're taught them as a means of survival, as Josh was sharing his experience. When you're in white spaces, you change how you talk a little bit. You don't want to be perceived as something that could be viewed as threatening from the dominant culture, what the dominant culture tends to portray, quote unquote, others. There's that. So you also want to be careful about that, so that you don't make other people uncomfortable or put a target on yourself, or make you even feel inferior or not intelligent. And it's and I'm getting to the burnout portion. So all of that is what people on the outside of the dominant culture walk walk through and live with every day. And it's something that we consider from young ages, and it's something that we're still considering in older ages. I'm not going to give away my age, but it's something we're still considering as we go on and live life. And it takes a toll. It's a lot of processing. And then you have on the other side of it, you have the dominant culture that doesn't really ever have to think critically about these things. Not just people from other cultures, but themselves, how they view other cultures, how that dominant culture might impact somebody else outside of it, how that might have something, some other framing, some other impact. And so what ends up happening is, especially when you have these conversations, is before somebody who is a member of the dominant culture, which in this country, we're going to say white American, then you're already exhausted. You're already tired because you're having to deal with these things. You're having to navigate this world and make sure that you are not showing too much of yourself. You're doing this game. And that can be frustrating and it can be tough. And then when it comes sometimes to doing this work, the eyes from the dominant culture, white Americans, turn to us to say, hey, tell me what's wrong. How can we fix this? And that's not a terrible question. Those aren't terrible questions. However, I think that, as Sasha mentioned earlier, and which I loved, don't ask a question you can answer with Google. I think there's a lot of self-reflection that does not happen with the dominant culture. And that is why when these things come up, it is often placed on Black people, brown people, people from the outside of the dominant culture to share their traumas and experiences and to really open up and talk about these things because they're unaware. Whereas if you were to just analyze it and think about things, step outside of it and look at things, you would know that the way this country and world society is set up, it's got to be, there's got to be a reaction there. There's got to be a problem. You know, there's the cause and effect there. Of course, it's natural. It's what's going to happen. And it's frustrating sometimes when you're a Black person trying to, talk about these things, because there's so much emotional labor. And I'll go straight to my specific experiences now. We've had so many conversations and overhearing things, and I just kind of I just unplug from some of these conversations now, or most of these conversations now, because it's too heavy. And I think that, unfortunately, the way that I feel is the cost of winning a argument is not worth the emotional labor and toll it takes on me as a person. And I'm talking about sharing our personal trauma. Say somebody Black, unarmed Black person is killed by police. Having to explain why that's not okay is hard and it hurts. And there's a lot of trauma behind it. And having to insist that it doesn't matter what they were doing, whether they ran, whether they'd been arrested before, whether they smoked weed, whether they've worn a hoodie, it doesn't matter, because that's a person. That's a person with a life, and that life was taken from them by a member of law enforcement. And in no way should that be okay. And having to explain that to people is like trying to convince people of your humanity. And there's just so much labor. And of course, that is an extreme example, but that is an example of something that happens a lot, unfortunately, because we do have these instances in our culture and society. They are frequent and they do happen. And then the toxic part of it, aside from the act itself, is the reaction to it from a large portion of the country, that somebody either deserves it or whatever. And so then you just feel so marginalized even further and traumatic, and wondering, like, if that happened to me, what would be the conversation afterward? What are the photos that they're going to use? Are they going to use a photo of me, wearing a do-rag with my Michael Vick jersey? Are they going to use a professional headshot from Anchor? You know what I mean? So you think about these things and try to figure out how would they shape the narrative of it. And it's hard and it's exhausting. So I'm done with that, but I do want to leave you all with a quote, and Sasha will know. One of my things is making sure that people know the real Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because I think a lot of people do not, you get a sanitized version of him, but he did a lot of talking, he did a lot of writing, and there's a whole lot out there about him that you can't reduce down to some of the more popular quotes. But I think this one is important, because I think if you haven't heard if you haven't been exposed to a lot of his teachings or a lot of his work, then this will sound unfamiliar to you, but these are words that he said to an end. And I think it goes along well with a lot of what I said, and as usual, where I am not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., so I use about 5,000 words. He can use a few, so I'm going to use his few to close out. Quote, whites, it must be frankly said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. That is from Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, written in 1967, 1 year before he was assassinated.
Oh, Andre, I need a second. It's a lot to process as your friend. So thank you for sharing. One of the things that we talk about a lot, and I think amongst the four of us in this space as we were prepping, was authenticity. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be authentic? And so during our prep call, all of you spoke very specifically about the importance of people who are approaching diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work to approach it in a way that is authentic. So I'm going to put everybody on a screen. So we're going to see that for a second because we've been sort of one-on-one for the moment. And I would love for each of you to share with us about what that means. Like, what does it mean to be authentic? How can you spot an authentic effort? And why is bringing an authentic approach something that helps to decrease trauma in the workspace? Andre, I know you've just said a lot. Would you mind following up and kind of going first here?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go first. Authenticity to me is, I view it as, my brain is going all over the place. I'm trying to find the right metaphor for this. I almost view it, if you're a Willy Wonka fan, all right, and forget what happens inside the factory. Okay, I don't want to talk about that because it's not great things happen inside there. But I want to mention golden ticket. To me, that's what authenticity is. It means that I can have I get the belief that this is going to be real, that there is going to be something behind this. This isn't just a checkbox. This is something that is going to be supported. This is something that we are going to address and approach in a way that is going to make me, that's going to ask people some difficult questions that's going to help it create an environment that is safe. Because it is difficult. You can, and the funny thing is, I say funny and obviously not as actually funny, but I say it as, I think that Black and brown people are very discerning, and we understand and we can see authenticity, and we know what's authentic, and we know what's kind of making a mockery of things. We know what people are just doing things because they've been told they have to do them. And we can tell what genuine effort and curiosity actually looks like, and wanting to cultivate an actual environment. And I think you can only do the latter with authenticity. If you're not authentic about the work, if you're not authentic about making changes, if you're not authentic enough to understand that some things may change, some things where you are very comfortable in them, you may now not be as comfortable as you were, but you're going to sit with that because you understand and you know that other people have not been comfortable for a very long time. And I think that, to me, is the big key, is when you spot that authenticity, then you're able to be more on board, more willing, because as I said before, a lot of this, regardless of where how much is leaned on, a lot of this does have to come from some sort of emotional labor and trauma sharing from Black and brown people, and people from other identities, of course, not just exclusively putting it to Black and brown, but it's going to require that. And when you are authentic about things, then that actually really makes it worth it. It makes the calculus of saying, if I share this, if I open up, if I talk about these things, is it going to be respected? Is it going to be honored? Is it going to help change something? If not, why put yourself through that? I've been in a lot of situations where I'm like, you know what? I could jump in this conversation And, it's kind of what I said about trying to, prove your humanity. Jumping in the conversation and trying to do that, you expend so much emotional effort and labor, and for what? So if it's authentic, the calculus changes. If it's not, I honestly, you might as well not even do it, because you're not going to get the result from it. And people are not going to open up because they're not safe.
Thank you, Andre. Josh?
Well said, Andre. I've never been comfortable talking about any of this. I always just kind of thought I didn't need it, right? I feel like my lived experiences, I've got this. But it wasn't until, last year when Anchor started their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA is what we call it, leadership committee, that I finally felt empowered and accepted. And I realized that I needed to be a leader in this space, and I need to work on my own DEIA journey. So I took this information back to our leadership at Alliance in Colorado and our membership. And, I was greeted, they embraced me, they embraced the work. They immediately started our own committee within our membership. They amended code of ethics to include it in our, the key components on what we expect from member agencies that join the association. We've, members have been eager to learn about speakers and webinars. So it's been an awesome experience to have that support through my leadership and our association. And as an executive, I've never really felt comfortable in leading in this space, but I think, because of Anchor and because of my board, the staff and member agencies that supported this effort, it really helps me want to do these webinars, like put ourselves out there like we're doing right now. It's very uncomfortable. And I just, I also want to comment, I've said this a lot to my friends and members, but everyone is on a DEIA journey of their own. And even just being here is really a very good first start. Please recognize nobody's an expert. Some of us haven't even started the journey, which is okay. And that all of our journeys will evolve over time. And I do think that your employees, the people that you serve, would be thrilled to know that you're trying to better understand them. And even just attending this webinar, it means a lot to me. It means a lot, I'm sure, to your staff and the people that you serve. So thank you.
Nicole?
Thank you, Josh and Andre. I really appreciate what they said, and it also helped me to kind of prepare for what I wanted to say, because what I completely wanted to say before, after listening to them, I was like, I want to double down on what they both said. But I also want to say how I know when I think about authenticity in the workspace, and also in looking at your own biases and digging deeper into DEI work, is that to understand, there's so many people who are like, I really want to understand. And sometimes they'll go to a colleague who's from a marginalized community and they'll ask some questions. And I've had colleagues who are educators, and I think they really wanted me to make them feel okay about what they thought. They chose the wrong person. But they also chose the right person, in that I said to her, and it kind of clicked while we were talking, and I said, listen, as a marginalized person, I do not have a manual to give you for every situation that I walk through. And she was just like, wow, okay, that's helping me kind of understand that I can't expect to know all of the answers herself. I said, I'm learning too. There are biases, like we're all continuously working on our own biases, I hope, and I pray that everybody is. But I think of authenticity in the workplace, and I think that recognizing people who are from marginalized communities in your work and different projects is not part of the icing, it's part of the cake. When you build your budget, or you're like, okay, this is what were our initiatives for the year, is DEI last? Is your work to recognize people who you want to talk at conferences, who you want to consult with, who you want to bring on to work on your website? Is it in everything you do, or is it just icing on the cake? That's what I think of, and that's what I want to endeavor with my life, is just like making sure I'm looking out in every aspect of what I do and who I work with and whatnot, about it being part of the cake, not the icing.
Thanks, Nicole. So a lot of people have a lot of good intentions, and I think we could call a little bit of that the icing, right? Like we want to start and we want to like do better, so we're going to start with what's on the outside. So what we do know is that a lot of times those good intentions go sideways, and they don't always have the greatest impacts, right? So people start out trying to do what they feel is the right thing, and they don't necessarily think about the impact. We would love if you could share for us today a situation in the workplace where a colleague had some good intentions, but didn't realize that the overall impact or effect was actually harmful in what they were doing. So if you're open to sharing that, I'll let you all chime in. I know one or two of you said maybe, maybe not. So in this case, what approach would you all have suggested to this individual that they could have done something differently to try to prevent the well-intentioned people from doing some more damage?
I'll share. I know we had kind of talked about this as a group, and it's not a story I tell lightly or that I've really ever told a lot of people. But I used to work with a person and at a former organization, and I was having a really tough time. And so I went to the person to chat with them about it, and I expressed how I was feeling, and they completely disassociated with what I said, took my hand, touched it, and said, "Black skin is so beautiful." And I honestly wasn't sure if I could tell that story today because many times I haven't been able to tell it without crying or just not being good. But if you're like, how could that happen? How could that happen? I'll tell you what, I'm sure there are colleagues of yours where some similar things have happened. I mean, Andre brought it up with talking about people having their hair touched. And I'll tell you, I spoke to this person about something else, and they were like, well, you're just always so strong. Like, I just expected you to get through it. So, what should have necessarily happened was them telling me that they weren't the person to talk to at that time if they couldn't have had a conversation with. Because if somebody comes to you with something and you know that you're not the right person necessarily, or you don't know, say it. You can say, hey, I just want to say I heard you. I don't think I'm necessarily the right, maybe a most appropriate person to talk to, but I'd like to, if you feel like to help you or like to connect you, or like to figure out a process to make you be okay at work. I have to ask Josh, Andre, as from in your own work situations, do you think that may have been the best response to it? Or I guess, what would you have maybe done in that situation?
Whew, that situation right there.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have done in that situation, quite honestly, because that is so not okay. Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing, and this is kind of where, especially with that example, I think this kind of feeds into like the difference, I think, between intention and impact. We hear a lot about people who have good intentions, as Sasha mentioned, but that's not good enough, quite honestly. Impact is going to be the lasting thing. It's the more thoughtful thing. Impact is the thing to be focused on. And that doesn't mean you're always going to get things right. But if you focus on the impact more than the intention, I think you're going to add a bit more thought into whatever action it is. And clearly that, especially in that example, I don't even know if there was a good intention there. I don't believe so. But the impact, if the thought process to consider the impact of that, particularly in that moment, there's no way that would have ever happened. So for me, the way I kind of look at impact versus intention is that you have to go deeper. It kind of goes back to that quote that I read from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Educate yourself, think about these things, think critically about these things, think critically about your own actions, about how they might be perceived, and figure things out. And again, it's uncharted territory in a lot of ways. So not going to get everything right, going to need input from people, but you're also, as we mentioned, authenticity, bringing everything kind of together. You're gonna have to make sure people are safe to be able to share these things and help guide you towards safer environments, more inclusive environments, better conversations, better ways to do things. All of that has to do with impact, not intention. Intention is kind of a quick thought. I can have good intention and accidentally do something that really harms somebody. But if you think a bit deeper, maybe you would have known that the likelihood for this to harm somebody is pretty high. So maybe you need to think a bit deeper to say, okay, what is the actual impact I want to have? And then change whatever the approach was going to be, or reconsider the approach or think deeper about it. So that's how I would categorize that situation. I don't know, Josh, do you have anything else to add to that?
I think for me, the pre-DEIA Josh would have ignored it and just felt uncomfortable, and just taken that, now I would try to make it a learning opportunity, or an opportunity to have that discussion. And that makes me uncomfortable, the other person uncomfortable, everyone. And I think that's part of the work that we're trying to do and need to do, is have some of those uncomfortable situations. And I wouldn't necessarily want to call them out and make them feel like they need to attack me or anything, but I think that it is something that hopefully we can start having conversations about.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot today, and we've gone through a lot of really critical and important conversations. So first of all, I want to thank you all for sharing. But before we open up the floor to questions, I'm sure our audience is processing a lot of information. So for them, and for perhaps people who are thinking about things for the first time, I'd love each of you to provide us with perhaps a couple of key takeaways from today's conversation that you think would be really good starting points for people, or places or things you want them to walk away thinking about. Andre, Nicole, Josh, I'll let you all decide who wants to jump in first.
I'm happy to start. So organizations within the IDD community must focus, on allocating resources. Nicole brought this up, training efforts. If you want to attract the right employees with the best minds and skills and experiences, you need to invest money and time in that. In today's culture, we are more aware of the identities within human experiences, and to serve people appropriately and adequately with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we must challenge our organizations to rise to the occasion and build strong DEIA presence in their agencies. As employers, I would suggest to don't be quick to judge or form an opinion, but because of the desire to many of us have to assimilate, or in many cases generational trauma that we all have different backgrounds and experiences. And I think I hope that you can take away that meaning that all of our backgrounds and our lived experiences can be a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and even fun in the IDD workforce. So that's my takeaway. I hope that you guys took some of that away as well.
Thanks, Josh.
I can go because mine are fairly quick and simple. I think the guy who uses 5,000 words all the time. So I'm going to try. I think the biggest thing is to be uncomfortable, especially if you're a part of the dominant culture. I think, as I mentioned, as Josh mentioned, as Nicole mentioned, being on the outside of the dominant culture, uncomfortable is kind of the way of life. It's kind of the route to survival. If we can do it, we've been doing it. You have a sense and any impetus to change it, be okay in being uncomfortable. No, it's not fun. I can tell you firsthand, it's not fun. I can tell you I've been doing it for decades and it hasn't been fun in any of them, but that is the way that it goes. I will also say be empathetic. I think there is a supreme lack of empathy, particularly in this country, for a lot of things across the board. Things that people don't understand, things that people don't want to understand. And I think that you have to approach things in an empathetic nature. And that's like your mind, that's not to burden somebody else. I have had people come to me and say, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. What does that do for me? That's you placing your guilt. Now I have your guilt. Why am I holding your guilt and my own stuff? So be empathetic, let that frame how you approach the work. And then my last one, as Sasha mentioned, I like to there's and this one may not be for everybody, but this is just where I am at personally, in the way that I approach these things is I think that there's a lot of work to be done. And I do think that it's okay no matter where you are starting your journey, but understand that there's so much at stake for you not catching up and getting yourself to a point where environments can be safe. Do the work as quickly as you can, as intensely as you can to catch up, because things have been like this for a very long time and making change is not easy, but it is long, 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 long overdue. So those would be my takeaways.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you, Andre and Josh, very eloquently saying your takeaways. I was just like, very good. I'll double down on what they both said, and in saying that if you mean it, like being authentic, coming from your heart, not just the work, I want to make things better or this, that, and whatnot, like genuinely wanting to live your life a way that makes other people feel safe and welcome. We all should feel safe and welcome at work. We all should want to feel safe and welcome in the spaces where we're having fun, where we're learning. And I was a facilitator for many years, and one of the things we would do when we were in person was opening our arms and turning to the person and being like, I'm willing to make moves. Like, it was just like, I welcome you to make mistakes. I welcome you to make mistakes. How are we going to learn? How are we going to move forward? And I'm not talking this intent versus impact, being like, I'm going to be the best or whatnot. Try, learn, be challenged, be uncomfortable, understand. I really liked what Andre said, being uncomfortable is part of the package. It's part of it. But yeah, thank you for coming and listening to us, and I encourage you to listen to the other people in your life who have stories to say. And the one takeaway I'll say on that is that sometimes when you're hearing a story, because you're uncomfortable, you may have a sense to make a joke just to make the person feel better. Don't. Just listen. Just listen. I'm telling you, the person will appreciate you even more if you just hear them and ask them what they need necessarily. So that is my takeaway.
Well, thank you all for those takeaways. We do have one, I think, really important question in the chat. Would you all be willing to answer it? Awesome. So the questioner says, currently my organization is doing DEI trainings with a consultant. We have some folks who are really angry about it, some BIPOC folk being triggered during these trainings because of the content, and some folks speaking up, not wanting to do the work or holding on to toxic things. How can we improve our next round of trainings to make sure that our BIPOC staff feel safe, supported, and or help recover from these trainings, and also address the folks who are still holding on to things that are harmful to BIPOC people? So why don't we, there's a lot there to unpack. We could have like a whole training on DEIA recovery. Let me see the head shaking. But let's start with the first part, which was, how do we make sure that our BIPOC staff feel supported during DEIA trainings? What can we do and what should we be thinking about?
That is a hefty question. Wow. So I think, and from my own experience, I can answer this from just things that I appreciate and would like in a situation like that, because a lot of times, as we've talked about, a lot of this can be re-traumatizing. You can have to think about a lot of these things that you already think about, but now you're doing it instead of like the safety of your friends, your colleagues, your family. You're doing it in front of coworkers and people who you know who might not, feel the same way or may have a differing viewpoint on things, which is harmful. For me, I think it's, again, intent versus impact. The intent to have this is good. The impact of having it is what's more important. So I think noticing the impact of sharing these things with people who are, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, understanding that it's exhausting. There may be hurt, there may be traumas, there may be a lot of things, and allowing them, if possible, time off, time to recover, time to discuss, be aware of when you schedule these things. So you're not having to go back to work and work a half day or something after exposing a lot of traumas to a lot of coworkers or talking about them. I think understanding these things really can help, the situation, and it's a signal that you're authentic about it and that you're understanding from their perspective what they might be going through that you're not going through if you happen to, be from a dominant culture and not from a culture that is marginalized. So to me is the thing. I would try and do that, try to focus on that a bit to make sure that they know that they're protected. It's not necessarily specialized treatment, but it's an understanding of what somebody's going through and the emotional impact of it.
Oh, I saw Josh on mute, so I was like, you can go, Josh. I'll go right after.
Go for it, Nicole.
Okay. I was like, all right, okay, I'll go. Double down on what Andre just said. Aftercare, so important to check in with the people that we work with, that things are working well. I also think that one of the really great training things I've picked up is agreements. I know there's like ground rules or whatnot, but our agreements is more community oriented and being like, these are agreements with each other. And we check in on those agreements before the training, after the training. Do people feel we met this agreement? Do we need to update our agreement with each other? Because it sounds a lot less harsh than ground rules, but like having agreements with each other, I think it enriches the experience. I mean, you see what works for your team. I know like we can give advice, but we don't necessarily know the team, but I think that would be really helpful. And in general, like I'd be curious to check in with those folks, because I'll say I joined a board and right away we went into DI training and it was not necessarily a safe environment. Nobody knew each other. There was no trust. So the building of trust and having aftercare check-ins and those kinds of agreements, would be my recommendation.
Totally agree. And I think one of the things that we've done with our DEIA efforts is we started with just asking the people that wanted to be in those conversations to be there. And it really did create a safe space where we were able to share and learn and grow. And then we've now been inviting others and not really forcing people on the DEIA journey, but letting people take the journey of their own and giving them the opportunities to join in when they feel comfortable or where they feel comfortable. But yeah, I've been in those meetings, Nicole, where they just are like, now let's talk about DEIA, and you're just feeling really off. It's not a fun place to be, especially when they look at the person of color and say, what are your thoughts?
Well, you all have shared a ton of thoughts with us today, so we're going to honor and hold those. And I wish, if you haven't seen the chat yet, that the three of you take some time to look there. Your community is certainly rallied around you today and said thank you for the
Wait,
vote.
can I answer the second part of the question?
Yes, you can, Andre, of course.
Okay, yes. Can you repeat it for the people if you still have it handy? I'm sorry.
I don't. It's okay.
Oh, no worries. I believe it was basically guidance on helping, the people who might not be on board with all of this.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Yes. Okay. The reason why I wanted to answer this is because I think it links back to that quote that I shared. I've heard of this in a few areas. Some of it has come from sports. I'm a big soccer fan. But I think what ends up happening is people, especially, white Americans that are interested in doing this work, keep it to themselves and are kind of like use it as almost a test of like personal purity almost, as opposed to using it as a way to actually function in this society and help change it on a more broader scale. Not really here for personal growth, great, but how does that help impact things, change things on a broader level? It depends on what you do with that. And I think that in situations like that, if you are facing somebody who, and I'm gonna suppose that the majority of people against some of this are going to be white people who are going to kind of be stuck in some of the things they've either been taught or learned or whatever, the way the society is, resistant to change, resistant to hearing these new perspectives, or that people are struggling because maybe they had financial struggles in life, but these are different and there are ways. I think the goal, the response the responsibility lays on other white people to talk to those people. It is up to that. It is not up to me to continue to share trauma and expose myself to a harmful individual. It is about self-policing the community and talking to people like that and saying, hey, this is where we're at. Like you can hear them. You can have more one-on-one conversation with them in a way that is going to be more impactful in many ways. And I think that it's really important for white people to talk to other white people about these things. As that quote mentioned, there's a lack of educating oneself on the side of white America about these issues. So if you are one of those white people who is trying to do that, bring others in, do it for other people, help them do that, because that is really the only way that it's going to change. People talking about their experiences that are not white, non-white, are rarely going to have a lasting impact. They may shut them up for a conversation. They may shut them up for the moment, but it's not going to help. Having an environment where they're challenged, where they're talked to by other white people and trying to explain these things in a way that they'll understand is the only way that I believe we're actually going to, I won't say the only way, but it's the highest probability, I believe. And something that, quite frankly, this country has not tried. So let's try.
You know what? I think that's a perfect note to end on. So the three of you, thank you so much for your time today, for your vulnerability, and showing us some paths forward to do the work and continue with that. We will certainly post some resources in the ACC for people to start leaning into that education space, and we'll make sure to include that King book as well for you, Andre, along with some others that we think would be some helpful resources and starting points. Before we close out today, we would like to say that the DEIA work that we are embarking on here at Anchor, we understand, is a journey that does not end. And we're going to continue to do more work and to try to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing in the space and how we can best support you. So to share a couple of those upcoming events before we close, I do want to introduce Gabrielle Sador, who is our Chief Operations Officer. She's briefly going to come on and tell you what we have next that you can lean into for some educational opportunities. There will absolutely be a link to the recording. We'll put that as well in our email to you on Wednesday. So, with that being said, unfortunately, Gab had to actually, she's on the screen, but there she is. And we were going to just mention some of our upcoming events. Gab, I hate to put you on the spot for that, but I think one of the big ones we were talking about was case competition, letting people know what's going on there, because that's a really great way that people can get involved by volunteering to judge. And then the second thing that we were going to talk about today is encouraging people to join the Leadership Academy, because the more diverse voices we have in leadership, the more work we can do. So.
Thank you, Sasha. And I'm blushing because I was honored to just be a part of this conversation, quietly listening. So thank you, Josh. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Andre. I want to give a shameless plug to Andre and Sasha, who will be presenting on some DEIA topics at the upcoming TASH conference in December. So if you were planning to join our friends at TASH in Arizona on December, Sasha and Andre will be talking about being your authentic self, embracing intersectionality, and how that impacts your own advocacy work. So I knew that they were going to mention it, so I felt that I had to. In addition to that, as Sasha mentioned, our applications are open for the Anchor Foundation's Leadership Academy. This is a 2-year program. This will be our 4th incoming class. And its intent is to help to build our future leaders of the IDD field. We have an incredibly robust class that's going on right now. It is a space in which we really hope to give our future leaders the tools that they need to support and sustain a diverse and unique and authentic workforce, which we so desperately need here, because you can't help people be their best selves if you don't feel like you can be your best self. So go to anchorfoundation.org if you'd like more information there. Another incredibly exciting thing that Anchor is doing for the first time in 2023 is we are having a case competition. And what does that mean? We are basically posing some of the biggest issues of our field, which is how do we recruit specifically Gen Z into our space? How do we make our workforce be something that people want to see as a career and a future? And we're specifically inviting our friends from historically Black colleges and universities, tribal institutions, and Hispanic and women focused institutions of higher education to be a part of this competition, because we really want to hear their voices and what matters to them and what's important to them. So the winners will be announced at our Anchor Annual Conference, April 24th, 25th, 26th in Chicago, Illinois. And we're nervous, we're excited, we're ready to invite these conversations. I'm so gratified to see so many of you on the chat. I'm so gratified to see so many of you on the chat, but also that having these conversations felt important and impactful to you as well. So thank you so much. And Cole, Andre, Josh, it took a lot to lead this conversation, to be so vulnerable. And I hope you have felt safe, and I hope you have felt supported. And I'm just grateful.
Thank you, everybody. We'll send that information out and take some good personal health care at this point, and take care of yourselves. And we'll be back for some more conversations. Josh, Nicole, Andre, we appreciate you. Have a great day, everybody.